Hey, everybody. Good morning. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Politically Homeless podcast. And with me is my returning guest, Lauren Morris, with a beautiful smile and wear a proud Ukraine shirt. There we go. All right. Excellent. And Lauren and I were discussing last time her political experiences in her part of the country, her interactions with the extreme left, including presence at the Center for Political Innovation Conference, which is a hardline Marxist-Leninist organization that wraps itself up with the flag of patriotism. So she wrote some articles on her former blog, Centrist Incorporated. She has a new blog out there. I definitely would like Lauren to talk about it. Lauren is also a founding member and leader of Conservatives for Ukraine. And thank you for joining us, Lauren. And if you want to add anything to the introduction of where people can find your work, please do so.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy Saturday. Yes, so anyway, my blog has been around for a long time, and it's under my name, Lauren Comelle Morris. That's spelled C-O-M-E-L-E, laurencomellemorris.com. I decided I wanted to do like a 501c3 and possibly get some funding for my work, journalism work and investigations and that kind of thing. So I opened up the Centrist Inc. and operated that for about 3 years until pathways turned and changed. Having a nonprofit is extremely time consuming, and it's just a lot of work, and it just wasn't the path for me. And I had great board members, and a lot of good things did happen, but it just got to be too much for me, frankly. And so I changed the name on the YouTube channel to the Centrist Post, and I changed the name on my blog tab. It's a sub area of my blog called the Centrist Post, and that's where I will upload the YouTube channel content, which has interviews and some of our investigative journalism and commentary that we do with the green screen, which is really fun here in the studio. And so the entity is still there. It's just under a different name. The podcast is also called the Centrist Post. And but yeah, that's where my work is.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So you were a founding member and one of the leaders and active participants in Conservatives for Ukraine, which I urge people to join on Facebook, whether you're a conservative or not, but as long as you take a strong stand against communism and the geopolitical designs of China and Russia. I think it's a good source for opinions, for news pieces, for articles, links, papers, etc. You developed a really special affinity for Ukraine and the cause of Ukraine trying to battle against Russian aggression. Now, many Americans probably have heard of Ukraine. Others might not be able, at least before 2014 and especially 2022, we're not able to find it maybe on the map. How did you become interested in Ukraine? Did you travel there, friends, family? What happened?
Well, my initial interest was in Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen president. And I just, kind of started watching him, and one thing, led to another. And of course, the invasion happened. And so I just started watching it from that angle, and one thing led to another. But I also feel a real close personal connection to the region and to the people over there, and it became so strong within me that I was overwhelmingly compelled to go over there. And so that's what I did. I made my plans, and I went by myself, and I was there not long enough. I wished that I had made my arrangements and stayed a week or two longer at the time, that I was there. So because it's quite a trip to get over there from the United States, and during wartime especially, because the only way you can get into Ukraine is via train.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was quite a journey.
Yeah. What got you into President Kadyrov, who is, well, I'll say sarcastically, a beacon of humanity? Um, what was it about him and his regime in Chechnya? And for those who don't know, in the audience, he is strongly aligned with Vladimir Putin's Russian Federation. He has sent troops to assist the Russians. They have gained a notorious brutality in their wartime actions. So not tipped you off, but what about Kadyrov hooked you into getting interested in that region?
Yeah, well, he's Muslim, and so he is Sharia compliant. He has 3 to 4 wives. I know he's got 3. He might have 4, and he rules that country via Sharia law. And so, that is of a deep interest to me, and that was what hooked me into that. And so I was also interested in, well, it's just, you're connecting the dots. I mean, he was there's a fight club in Dagestan where they train wonderful, brilliant MMF fighters, and he was connected to that. And of course, the brothers who committed the Boston bombing, one of them was a Golden Gloves. The older brother was able to. I mean, the brother. I get these guys confused. Got so many names in my head. Was a Golden Gloves candidate and very talented boxer, and because of his immigration status, he got denied the ability to compete in a Golden Gloves championship. So he goes off to Dagestan and he trains in this fight club. So I was just looking into these different things and seeing what these dots are. Mm-hmm. And that area, Dagestan, is a very interesting area. And so, then I learned about the Northern Caucasus, and then I learned about, Russia, and I realized that I didn't have a extensive knowledge in Russian history, Putin's aggression, the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. And one of my close friends, when the war happened and the invasion happened, called me up on the phone and said, F Ukraine, just immediately. Okay, there was this deluge of right-wing alternative media people. I first saw it from Lara Logan, and then everybody just kind of piled on. You got Lara Logan, then you have Steve Bannon, and then you had Alex Jones, and you had all these people that were just piling on the F Ukraine narrative. And I'm thinking, wait a second, what is going on here? Because this is happening a little bit too fast, and everybody's just piling on this narrative. And I realized the gaps in my knowledge base, what I didn't know about it. And so, but I wasn't one to just pile on, and be an underling for the king of the mountain over there. And I knew that there was something really bad going on. So I started getting up at 4 a.m. and spending hours every day, watching the developments in Ukraine, watching the war, learning and absorbing everything I could about Maidan and about the history of Ukraine, about the Russian aggression, what Putin did to Georgia, what he did to Chechnya, what he did to, tried to do to Finland, just the whole history of his advancements and his aggression and his politics, and going back to the time of the Bolsheviks. And I educated myself from numerous sources, and as many sources as I could get. And I spent the time and I devoted myself before I decided to come out and have an opinion on any of it. And I learned that just like with anything, I'm a researcher. I'm a professional researcher. People hire me to do research for them, which I do.
Mhm.
And I learned that, so I know how to connect dots, and I know how to disseminate large amounts of information and pull them from various sources, and put them together into a package, to create a profile of maybe a person of interest or a terrorist network or events and that kind of thing. Because information is not always going to be in one spot. It's coming from different areas. So during this process, I learned that European media, the Dutch, the Germans, the Finns, the Poles, had a vastly different perspective on the war in Ukraine and on Putin than the American media did. And I also learned, and I feel, it's my opinion, they are a lot more professional than we are, the ones that I watch anyway. They have integrity. And so I started watching European media. And most of it is on YouTube. It's great. YouTube is a great way to get an education on what you did not get in school or in college. It's a great way to educate yourself, And so anyway, I just started pulling, these bits of information. And, as a journalist, my journalism that I have been doing all these years is one where I go out on the ground and I try to get the story myself, because I know that if I'm pulling information from other people and then basically I am regurgitating the information that they are giving me. When I go out and I get the information myself and I videotape the event myself, and then I come home and I view what I have videotaped, because the camera sees differently than what the human eye sees. Mm-hmm. That's also an education as well, watching events on the ground and everybody that's involved. So I knew that if I went over to Ukraine, that something would happen and that I would see something, and it would create, who knows what it was going to create, or who knows what it was going to happen. But I knew that in order for me to have integrity in my reporting and my writing, I needed to get my own story. And so that's why I went.
And I think that's an excellent reason. I mean, for those of you who don't know, I love to travel to begin with. I love going to other countries. That's something I've been doing for the past over 3 years. Done it sporadically with family and whatnot before. So, it's definitely something, if you are able to travel to different countries, and if you're interested or active in a particular issue like Lauren is, definitely use precautions, but do travel, because that's the best way to get it without any minders, escorts. You go straight into the territory, you immerse yourself. And this sets me up for the next question. Now, of course, we'll talk a little bit about, in the last part of the interview, perhaps, about the networks of Russian disinformation conduits in the United States, which is very strong on both sides of the political equation. But when you got into Ukraine via train, you said, assuming ultimately, and of course, if you're not comfortable answering certain specific questions because of privacy or security reasons, I'm totally sensitive to that. But when you got to Ukraine, what parts, even if you speak in generalities, did you visit? And what did you see? Because I have to say, and this occurred throughout the history of Cold War America, and even a little bit in post-Cold War America, you have allies of the United States being portrayed as these rightfully or wrongly, horrifically fascist governments, and usually the aggressor, like the Vietnam War, North Vietnam, portrayed as this comparatively saintly government with a saintly cause. And you hear amongst elements of the right about Ukrainian kill list, or you have Ukrainian atrocities. being talked about. Or, oh my God, Ukraine is a dictatorship because they're suppressing the Orthodox Church, they're suppressing all these political parties. But when you take even a cursory look at the so-called kill list, so-called, because it's not an actual assassination list, it's counter information and counter propaganda organizations and individuals that are highly critical of Ukraine or apologists for Russia, as well as the suppression of these parties. Many of these parties were Quisling organizations tied in with the Russians or dead set against Ukraine's survival as a sovereign state, like the Ukrainian Progressive Socialist Party and their Communist Party, and the Orthodox Church, which is tied in with the Russian intelligence Orthodox Church. What did you see getting to Ukraine? What is the rhetoric versus the reality when you got on the ground?
The reality is what the people are experiencing on the ground. And when you go to Maidan Square, it's a shrine, and you will see there's a wall off of it, and you will see photographs of every of the people that died there on the ground at Maidan. Mm-hmm. And it says there, it's got picture of their face, and it says what their age was, what area of Ukraine they were from, so you could see how far they came for the Maidan Revolution of Dignity is the proper name that it's called, and their occupation. And so what you see is a country that is a people that are united in the fact that they do not want to be ruled by Russia. And the things that Putin tried to do through Yanukovych during the time that this was all happening, where they say, oh, the CIA, it was a coup, Maidan was a coup, and it was a CIA thing. No, that Yanukovych was a tool for Putin, to put it very, vaguely and generally, and he was beginning to just exercise more control over the movements of the people, through vehicle registration, through taxing, through economics, and it started to come down like this, and the people were not going to have it. And these are young people, and the young people in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s who are working the jobs and paying the taxes and having young families. And so one of the realities on the ground was, this is the age group, this is the demographic, and this is what the people want and what they don't want. And they are united over there in the fact that they want to be self-governing, and they're smart enough to make it happen. They're educated, their technology is advanced, and they were able to mobilize and communicate with one another via apps and mobilize. And it is my understanding that the movement grew to about 1 million people during those winter months, when they were physically having a kinetic standoff with the Yanukovych regime.
And that's it. I had a little bit of it reminds me of an experience I had with Ukraine. Obviously, I've never been to Ukraine. In fact, half of my family tree is partially Ukrainian, great grandparents from Kiev, Odessa. So that's part of my little disclosure about me. But what's interesting is that I had a little experience, and many in the audience know I have an interest in World War II and the history of fascism and National Socialism, their economic ideology, their governing ideology, and what their collaborators believed in during World War II. And Ukraine was occupied by National Socialist Germany. Mm-hmm. Most of World War II, and they had collaborationists there. They had newspapers. One major one published was translated into the word New Ukraine Word. So the equivalent of the Ukrainian National Library had access to it. And I was able to translate through Google Translator and the DeepL Translator the Cyrillic text. And what was interesting is the library system there, their electronic resources must have been under attack, cyber constantly. So eventually, and I had paid for a subscription to give you a brief subscription window, and the people were so helpful at the library and getting back to me by email, so friendly. And we started to talk about Ukraine a little bit too, because I wanted to wish them well. These are average people. These are fellow professionals. Library manager of a small library branch in South Florida, as many people know already. And the interesting thing is that talking with these people, you're right. They're very united behind their country. You can tell in their writing that they really are committed to that fight. And it made an indelible impression on me. I was like, wow, that's really, it's nice. It's instead of an entirely demoralized country, you do have people from all walks of life. I mean, average library workers, I mean, those are not Ukrainian CEOs or leaders. These are normal people like you and I. And that was impressive to see the tone there. I wish I could pull up the email or dredge it up in my email. I think I might have saved it, but it just made a real impression. And it really kind of, that small tidbit of an interaction, it does kind of dovetail with what you're saying, that fighting spirit. Now, did you see any signs of a dictatorship there? And, to answer some of my points, what conflict did you see between the narratives as spun by people, elements on the left and the quote unquote right who are virulently anti-Ukraine, the F-Ukraine crowd?
Right.
What is your lived experience there or visual experience and what you saw on the ground versus what they were saying?
Oh, just a deeply religious nation, and a nation that loves and protects its children and values its people and values its country, culture, and values its history and its cultural history and its religious history and just the beauty of that nation. And so, people don't think that, or the F Ukraine crowd don't see it as even anything that's real. Okay, they don't connect with it as a real people, as a real country, how it might be a civilization that we need to functioning in the world, a piece of the world that we need, a resource in totality, agricultural resource, in human resource, just the intellect. And it was beautiful over there and clean, and it was orderly and it was organized, and amidst the chaos that's happening to them. And it was impressive, to be over there and to just, walk around on the streets and see the people. And so the remarks made about, that Ukraine is corrupt, or let's get to the religion thing. I have never in my life seen such beautiful cathedrals as I saw over there. Their religious houses they're ancient, and they're absolutely magnificent over there. And so this is a deeply religious nation, and that had a big impression on me. And so here's the thing I wanted to say. One of the blatant, nasty, horrible lies that I heard before I was over there was that, they were sex trafficking and organ harvesting and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that country has an underground tunnel system. And it is some of those systems are tied to the monasteries, the ancient monasteries, where in those times they dug themselves underground for protection, and they are tombs where their dead have been preserved. They're historical sites now. Some of them are salt mines, like they have, the big salt mine in Poland, in the Krakow area, that you can go and you can visit. So the people that were saying these things never had the presence of mind to even look into what they were saying. And, that was so I looked into that as well. Okay, well, what is this underground tunnel system? Did the Soviets dig it and build it? Who built these things, and where are they? What areas of Ukraine are they, and what are they being used for? Well, I can tell you it's probably a bucket list, a tourist destination now, to go and to see that. And when you go into these cathedrals that they have, you're going to experience an ancient Catholicism, and you're going to experience Mass in a different language. And you're going to experience looking at the devotion that people have on their faces as, Mass is being administered. And you're going to look around the rooms and you're going to see ancient artifacts. And it's just incredible. It leaves a definite spiritual impression upon you. This is something that they want to preserve. And I can tell you this, Putin had better not bomb St. Sophia in Kiev. He better not. Or some of these other places, he's picking them off in these little villages. I went to Bucha and I saw some of the small artillery fire that hit the chapel there where I was, and you can see it. And it is such a deep pain that is being inflicted on the Ukrainian people with the fact that Putin is sending rockets in to bomb civilian structures at least a couple times a week, and killing the innocent civilians.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the disinformation pieces that I've come across, and you'll see it on some of the left wing, specifically sympathetic communist sources, is, oh, Russia doesn't want to take Ukraine. They just want to take the eastern half and just have the Russian-speaking people. I'm sure you've heard this before. I see you're shaking your head. I got to do a coffee refill, so I'm going to let you talk at length. But what I found with the information,
of course they have Russian-speaking people.
Yeah.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
Okay. So who are we to just the F Ukraine crowd to say, well, they're Russian? We don't know. I mean, the people that say that, they don't know anything about this culture, about these people, and to just so easily kick them to the curb and say that they don't matter, and brand them with all these labels and all these names. It made me, Nevin, it made me so angry. And I was angry at the crassness. I was angry more so at the ignorance. And because this is coming from people who also understand that our country is under attack and we are at war. And you watch Marjorie Taylor Greene come out and rattle off the list. Okay, I call it the list. We talked about this before, of all the things that are wrong with Ukraine. And I think to myself, who does she think she is? Who does she think she is to be so slanderous and libelous against those people? It's unconscionable to me. It's beyond wrong. It's beyond ignorant, and it's dangerous.
Well, yeah, especially since she has a large following within the MAGA Republican crowd. And look, I mean, not all the MAGA folks are pro-Russian. That's obvious from the Conservatives for Ukraine Facebook page. They're not all garbage, as soon-to-be former President Biden says, any more than all of Kamala Harris's supporters are garbage.
Right,
I don't go down that partisan show
right.
or that road. That's how it goes on this show and in my Substack blog and everything else. But putting that aside, and I'm gonna get a refill on my coffee if you guys don't mind. There's this egregious view, and they'll back it up with different points, different facts, or allegations that Ukraine is a neo-Nazi country, or that Ukraine, the Kiev regime, as they term it, is a neo-Nazi state. And yes, there are neo-Nazi parties or national socialist or neo-fascist parties that are or were active. Half the time they don't like the government of Zelensky for various
Right,
reasons,
right.
like Svoboda and other parties, some of which was a very good article, and I'll let you talk about the neo-Nazi regime allegations. There was an article on illiberalism.org. It was more like a paper, and I cited it on my Substack on my positions on Ukraine, which I think you skimmed through, at least you're familiar with it. And what it talked about in that paper on illiberalism.org was how those so-called far-right parties, because they're really not far-right when you think about it, but like groups like Svoboda and the National Core and others, that in some cases they were penetrated by the Russians themselves and pro-Ukrainian Russians as provocations to make the Ukrainian cause look bad, to push them in pro-Russian directions and things, and to divide the Ukrainian public. When you went to Ukraine, how were the Jews, the LGBTQ plus people? You mentioned it was a very religious country. I mean, was there jackboots stomping around Kiev where the economy was so controlled, where if the CEO had to take a tinkle, he had to get permission from the government, and labor was controlled? Racism rife and militarism, the whole 9 yards. What the heck is going on in Ukraine? And how do you answer those allegations, which a lot of right wingers who are anti-Ukraine will say about Ukraine? Neo-Nazi regime in Kiev is usually the term for it. So I'll be right back.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So the first narrative that came out after the invasion was about the Azov army. And of course, they were centrally located at the time in Mariupol because there was a standoff happening, and they were at heavy fighting in Mariupol. And there's an industrial plant there where many of the citizens had gone underground. And the Azov, AZOV, defenders were defending the Mariupol plant, right? So here comes all these memes on Facebook and Twitter and Telegram showing military patches and posters with symbolism on them that they were comparing to Nazi symbolism of the SS and various other symbols. The Russians were capturing some of these guys, and they were putting out videos which we don't know are real or not, and showing tattoos, Nazi tattoos, various things like that. The United States responded by putting out a message to make sure that this was a group they didn't really know very much about at the time. And no, we were not funding Nazis in Ukraine, and that the Azov army was not getting weapons from the United States, to fight off Putin. So this was their reaction. So fast forward, when I go to Ukraine, and I'm walking down one of the main streets across from Maidan, there's a recruiting center in Ukraine, and there was a big banner about free the Azov defenders, and there were several burnt cars and artifacts and things like that up and down the street in front of the recruiting office about free the Azov defenders. There were tables with Ukrainian military out there, men and women doing recruiting. I didn't see people get grabbed off the streets. Basically, what I saw in general was a functioning city, albeit wartime. It was a functioning city, and people were going about their daily business. I didn't see a lot of children out when I was there, virtually any, really. And I think at the time they were all in school, obviously. But so what I noticed was a counter narrative from the Ukrainian people supporting the Azov defenders. Well, this narrative went on for quite some time. This Nazi narrative and the Azov thing went on for quite some time. So one of the guys that I looked into, and I was talking to Jeff Nyquist about this when Jeff Nyquist interviewed me, and we talked about this, and I want to correct a statement that I made. I was looking into this guy named Yan, Y-A-N, Yan Petrovics, I think his last name is. And he was kind of an offshoot of the Wagner group. And I got a hold of some photos of him, and he was working on the ground in the Donbass at the time doing military operations. Yan is a young guy. He's got a wife and 3 kids. Well, anyway, Jan was one of these guys that had some of the symbolism tattooed all over him, right? And it was Nordic stuff. So there was some Celtic influence in there, some Viking influence in there. And it all became just this mishmash of symbolism, that was just all combined together and mishmashed together into this big mess. And so there again, you learned, well, there's your Nazi. I mean, there's the Nazi right there. Yan is the Nazi. Yan is over there, killing people in the Donbass. And they're blaming that on Ukraine. Well, Jeff asked me, he says, do you think they're far right? And I said, oh, I think they're moderates. Which was really, I look back on it and I'm thinking that's kind of a dumb thing to say. But what I meant to say was, they're their own thing. They're politically homeless. What I mean? And so, but they support the Russians because the Russians are who's paying them. But it also showed me at the time just kind of the hodgepodge of command leadership that was happening on the side of the Russians. Mm-hmm. Just give everybody guns and go in and kill some Ukrainians. And by the way, you can rape and pillage them and bring us your children. Bring us the children back to the leader. It was that kind of barbarity that was going on. So anyway, Yan leaves the battlefield and he decides to go back home. And the picture on my blog is really scary, you guys. I mean, the picture is of him and this other guy that he's with, and the photograph is from the ground up, and so they're looming down on you, and they're shirtless, and they've got these ammo belts around them, and their eyes are just really like they're all fueled up on some kind of drugs. They just look like these murdering bastards, which is what they are. And it's really frightening that there are men like that out there. But this is what the heart and soul of what the Ukrainian people are fighting, is this real evil, okay? So anyway, Jan decides he's going to go back home, and he gets stopped at the Finnish border, and he at a checkpoint, and he gets arrested, and he's in prison, and there's arguments going back and forth because Kyiv wants him. They want him back in their court system so that they can rack him. Just like they went out and because the the Ukrainian police services who are working on trying to grab these Russian guys. And of course, the Russian troops themselves, they want to grab these high-level guys and bring them to justice. And they got a couple of Ramzan Kadyrov's top guys, you know, early on over there in the Donbass. So there are some really interesting dudes in prison. But if they get captured outside of Kyiv, there's going to be a problem with who gets to keep this high-level guy and for what reason, and who's going to prosecute the guy. So I don't really know right now where Jan is, but I sure would like to find out.
Yeah, that's all very, very interesting. And you mentioned the Nazi part, and you also recently corresponded with me about some Nazi issues or memorabilia on the Russian troops, if I remember correctly. And, you know, I always find it ironic, even if the allegations of the anti-Ukraine, more Russia apologist right and left, or elements of both, say, even if it was a neo-Nazi regime, I mean, which it's clearly not. I mean, I know one shallow comment is they have a president who's Jewish. They have the Jewish leadership, rabbinical leadership is behind the war effort. You know, I mean, come on, give me a break. I mean, it's really, there's all kinds of disinformation out there, and we know that the Russians, and of course this is not a tirade against the Russian people, what I'm about to say, but more of a indictment of their government, their military and intelligence leadership, is they have neo-Nazis fighting on the Russian side, starting like RNU, which is the Russian National Unity, which is a political party, which is a neo-fascist group. They're fighting alongside. They have neo-Nazis from all over the world also backing the Russian regime. The Russian imperial movement is loosely tied in with the Putin regime, despite some issues between them and the government. They have the German NPD, the National Democrats. They have elements of, well, it used to be called the Front National, which is a right-wing populist party. It changed its name to, I forget the name of it now. You know, you have all these different political parties that have, you know, supported all of Russia's efforts. They provided troops, they provided propaganda support. Several of them have joined with European leftist or communist parties to legitimize the elections in Crimea back years ago, which legitimized, if you will, its absorption into Russia, whatever side you take in that situation. But the fact of the matter is you have this really unholy alliance of the extreme left as well as the so-called extreme right or right-wing populists and even neo-Nazis with the Russian cause. I don't have all the facts in front of me. If you want to visit my Substack page, Wilderness of Mirrors, I write an essay on Ukraine, which is a very measured, it's not extreme in either way, but I do hit hard on Russia's long-term, long-range intentions for Europe. Ukraine is, from my belief, as I lay out and document in the essay, they're not going to stop at Ukraine. They want to continue to neutralize all of Europe, create a collapse of NATO. And if that happens, unfortunately, we have become very dependent. Our markets are globally interdependent, which is a good thing and a bad thing. And if Europe decides under Russian domination to give us a problem and say, look, we're going to make our exports more expensive to the United States, or hey, pro-Putin parties take power in Europe, slight possibility, or maybe not so slight, they could say, oops, we're going to embargo all those products and we're not going to send things like the high technology items, let's say from Germany, for example. Another party that's very firmly in, by the way, the Russian camp, by the way, a right-wing populist party is the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, is another one that's very pro-Putin. They have literally close ties with the Russians. They visit each other's countries. They have ties with the Russian embassy, which probably in Germany, which means, of course, probably is with Russian intelligence. I cover this in my paper in great detail. So it takes a lot of nerve for the people that really are the F Ukraine crowd to call Kiev, the Kiev government, neo-Nazis, because there are neo-Nazis fingerprints all over the Russian government and their intelligence and military. And when you take a look at Mr. Kadyrov, for example, I mean, that guy is, he's not exactly, as I said, the beacon of humanity. I mean, it's the most intolerant dictatorship there you can think of. I mean, they put LGBTQ plus people in concentration camps.
That's Sharia. That's Islamic law. Okay, that's not just Kadyrov. That is Islamic law.
Right.
And that, this is the thing where when you throw out a nugget of something, you're throwing out something really valuable. And I think we ought to take your paper and we ought to map it out in a graph. And we ought to show people visually, all these parties, because there's so many people writing so many articles, right? And we have the ability on the internet now to pull down this information into a mountain of information and a mountain of evidence. And all that information, Nevin, that you just rattled off, I guarantee you that I mean, nobody knows it. And I can really literally say nobody knows it, because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, which you have done. I don't know how many pages your essay is, but how I'm sure it took you countless hours to pull that stuff together, and then it goes out there. It's going to be there forever. It's in the electronic sphere, forever. But to get that out to the American public, we need to give them a visual of that. I imagine this kind of stuff, and now the Russian connections globally, and that because what we hear now from our mainstream media, which has basically just parroted what they've said in Europe, is that Russia is committing sabotage operations around the globe. Okay, so that makes it suspicious for the fires in Turkey and various other people that he wants to bully, that may be trying to separate themselves from him. So these things, in my view, in order to correct the public discourse, we need to give them more information, because the American public, we don't have that number of political parties that are allowed to exist. You basically have three, right? And you have various parties, but this is the problem with the corruption in Ukraine. There are too many groups that are allowed to become a political party and have influence and vote as a political party and influence the Russian-speaking people. This is where corruption grows. And, this is why that they've had a problem. They're working on it. If they weren't working on their corruption, Zelensky would not have the support that he does of the European Union. They would not be putting money and weapons in his hand. You got to get control of this thing. So here comes this narrative about, oh, he's shutting down the Orthodox Church. Okay, well, what does that mean, audience? What does the Orthodox Church mean? Okay, is it a Ukrainian Orthodox Church? Is it a Russian Orthodox Church? Who's running that? Is it, how does that entire system work? Because it is a big system. And so I think that these things really, really matter in terms of putting it out into the public. I think it's important for us as journalists, at least this is how I do things, okay? This is one of the things that I saw that was a problem with all the F Ukrainers out there. People absorb politics too broadly in a way, and then they start reporting on everything. And they have too many opinions on everything, and it ends up being just a cursory view. Deep research is really important in order to paint a profile on somebody. It's like a murder investigation. You've got to turn over every little blade of grass, within a set of parameters. You got to keep your focus on your niche, you know, and just focus on that. Because if you start getting out, you know, too broadly, then you're not going to be the expert in the subject matter that you want to talk about. And so these groups, these political groups and these sabotage operations, they know that, okay? They know that people can't absorb what they're doing. They know that people don't know who they are or what they're doing. They know that most people are never going to find out. I still talk to people and they'll say, who's the Wagner group? And in my mind, I'm thinking, how could you not know at this point who the Wagner group is? Well, they watch CBS every night for 30 minutes and that's all they watch. They don't have time. They don't have time to absorb information. They don't have time, you know, they're not fast readers. They just absolutely don't have the time to educate themselves.
Yeah, I wanted to and to dial back a little bit when you were talking about we were talking about the different parties and Russia's long-term intentions. I do want to read excerpts of a letter. It was dated purportedly from November 30th, 2023, from the Russian Institute of Scientific Information on Social Sciences, its director Kunitsov, to the chairman of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Volodin, and they denounced, quote, the neo-colonialist of the West, which is a very Soviet-style language. And according to Volodin, the government sought to solve the social problems in Russia through a, quote, a policy of exporting chaos abroad, that is, the de-escalation of internal tensions through external expansion. The letter also predicted, quote, thus, after the completion of the SVO, which is the acronym for Special Military Operation, that's their euphemism for their attack on Ukraine. In Ukraine, in the fall of the Kiev regime, Russia's confrontation with the West will not end, but will only intensify. In fact, we are now only at the initial stage of the transformation of a unipolar world, meaning that dominated by the United States in their view, into a multipolar one, which means where the United States will become, at best, a lesser power, or at worst, not existing, in my opinion, dominated by Russia and China. That's their view of multipolar. Right. With different centers of influence in the fading of the West. However, the centuries of the West colonial past will not allow Russia to achieve its interests without hindrance. You know, you take a look at, for example, what Dmitry Medvedev had famously called for. Was at one point the Russian vice president, now the deputy chairman of the Russian Russian Security Council. He stated that the goal of the Russian Federation was, quote, to finally build an open Eurasia from Lisbon in Portugal to Vladivostok, which of course is. Oh my,
yeah, right.
And there are tons of quotes where I can, like, you know, rattle all of this off. This is in my paper on Substack on Russia's aggression towards Ukraine and its ultimate goal for Europe. I encourage people to read it. I know it's not a page turner. I know I'm trying to kind of write in a dry academic way, but I think the information is very important, and it certainly will provide education of really what Russia's goals are for Europe, and that they don't want to stop with Ukraine. And look, I've looked at the reports which are in this paper, which talks about Russia actually had very meticulous plans, or remind me of their Cold War era plans against occupation in regards to invasion of the United States as well as Western Europe. Very meticulously, like they would create, I think, what the Russians internally called the Movement for Peace in Ukraine, which would seize power in Kiev and create a sort of puppet government. And there would be massive purges and deportations and whatnot in occupied Ukraine, which have been doing with the children, as you refer to before. Give me your children to the leader. That would only expand. They would also secure Ukrainian industry and nuclear power capabilities. They would kind of shut it down and ship it off to Russia. I mean, there would be, and there's a lot of other aspects. I mean, I can pull it up again and find the source for that, because I think this is important information, because this is real. This really is. I
would like to tell everyone, because this is what I'm going to do as well. I just got a brand new printer. I'm all excited about it. Print it out, everybody. Print it out, you know, so that you have it, and absorb it when you can absorb it, as much as you can absorb it. Go line by line and commit yourself to reading it, because that is how you become educated on these things. And then you try to apply. See, when I went to Ukraine, Nevin, and on the YouTube channel, the Centrist Post, one of my first videos was a really rough video of my trip to Ukraine, and some of the video that I took just with my cell phone. And you are able to read a document like that, okay? And then you go there and you see how that's going to play out on the ground, okay? People are disappearing. People's children have been stolen from them, ripped from their arms. The propaganda and the lies that have penetrated and infiltrated that society to the point where you see Kyiv, people in Kyiv standing around just looking at each other. Nobody knows who's who over there. The level of fear, the level of violence, the number of people who've had their arms and legs blown off, the number of people who have lost their entire families. So the trauma of these movements, like you say, these political agendas, just as you just described, what Russia is doing, what it looks like on the ground is exactly what happened in Bucha. Exactly. And when you go over there and you see the children and you see the people, like when I went to Krakow, Poland, first place, like I said, I had no idea what I was going to see when I got over there. And I dropped my bags off at the hotel, and I walked down to the town center in Krakow, Poland. And here was a group of people who, Ukrainian refugees who were protesting. You see them in their clothing, you know, and you see the trauma and you see the tears, okay? And it sinks in. It sinks in, and you understand the levels of tragedy that is happening to them. And this is the disconnect that the American people have with Ukraine. And it's like Zelensky has said, and Chuck Holton, our friend Chuck Holton, who has a YouTube channel as well, who used to be a journalist for, and still is sometimes, for the Christian Broadcast Network. He's been to Ukraine, 6 to 8 times. He says, you don't understand it until you go over there on the ground and you see it. And so this is why Zelensky has everybody come. Please come to Ukraine. Come to Ukraine. Sit with me. I'll take you around. I'll show you. And here's a tragedy with that. Lindsley, Joe Lindsley, who is a journalist who has reported on Ukraine every day. And he lived over there in Ukraine for 2 years before he even started reporting on it. He took Jack Posobiec. Jack Posobiec went over there, okay? And Joe took Jack Posobiec around. Jack Posobiec got an eyeful and an earful. And that guy has the audacity to come back here and lie night and day about Ukraine to the millions of people that watch Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, all that whole Alex Jones group, all that group of people, from Bannon down. The audacity of those people to lie to us. What is that? Okay. Why are they doing it? Well, there's a reason that they're doing it. And so we're being penetrated. We are being infiltrated. Our intellect is the first target.
Yes, well, that's leftover from the Cold War era too, as well. And people like myself and definitely our friends and colleagues J.R. Nyquist and Trevor Loudon, amongst others, have argued that the Cold War never really ended. And I have done a lot of research as well, which they have promoted kindly about that, where I provided quite a bit of footnoted evidence to support their claims. And the
Right.
paper I was referring to about Russia's plans against Ukraine as a whole, it's titled Preliminary Lessons in Conventional Warfighting from Russia's Invasion of Ukraine. It was issued in July 2022. From the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies. It's Mikhailo Zabrodsky, Jack Watling, Alexander Danieluk, and Nick Reynolds. And it really talks about that, their Russian war plans. So it's very interesting. I mean, I summarize a little bit of it that's important. In the event of victory over Ukraine, I'm reading from my paper, the Russian Federal Security Service, or FSB, would purge the opposition and recruit parliamentary collaborators to form what was referred to as a movement for peace. These collaborationist elements of the Ukrainian parliament would form a pro-Russian dictatorship that would be tasked to suppress resistance in the name of preserving peace. Ukrainian nuclear plants would be, quote, denuclearized, that was their term, meaning administered directly by Rosatom, which is one of Russia's state agencies that comprises the nuclear industry in Russia. Captured defense industries would be carted off to Russia. Of course, then I add my commentary. These are the sobering facts which prevent me from embracing the, quote, anti-imperialist hankies and the ostrich head in the sand positions of the non-interventionists. That's from my paper, and I provided the source so people can replay this a couple of times to get the full title, and they can read the paper themselves. And there are many other.
Will there be a link in the YouTube?
I could provide a link for my Substack. I could put that in the YouTube thing. Certainly I can do that. That's a good suggestion. But I wanted to get into some important point that you brought up, and that is the psychological warfare, the penetration against the American public. And you have seen that, you have fought that. Jeff Posobiec, I mean, whether you're conservative or liberal, whichever side, he has done some very good work, if I recall, a while ago on Antifa and its violence. But folks like him who really you wish they would know better and be familiar with the tactics of communism, that frankly, he is one of many people that, for whatever reason, repeats the pro-Russia narrative. You look at Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is very good in understanding the Chinese Communist Party. He is very good from my position, on his critiques of conventional conservatism and sort of libertarian economics taken too far. I mean, whatever your opinions, we all have different opinions within this community, obviously, on other issues. But the thing of it is that you have Bannon, Jack Posobiec, Charlie Kirk, who I never really agreed with. If you read his book, Turning Point, issued in 2012, he was an apologist for the outsourcing of American jobs, basically. So I never was really crazy about Charlie Kirk to begin with. And, it's just, I think he's an opportunist. I think, like many in politics, he's going to go wherever the political winds shift. If Trump calls for example, lowering the Social Security to 55 or more of a Medicare for all system, Charlie Kirk will support it. It will do intellectual gymnastics to support whatever the political establishment deems fit. But you've studied these people. What do you think, from your research, from your interactions with politically active conservatives and Republicans, why are these people doing this? And really, I did not know this about Jack Posobiec, that he went to Ukraine. I did not know that. And yet, why would he do that? Why wouldn't he speak of the truth or what he saw?
I think in general, they like their status where they are. and they like their jobs, and it's about money. I mean, who's paying them? We don't know. I mean, didn't Tim Pool just get taken down for accepting Russian money? So
Yes.
these, it's like whenever you like, here's an example, and I'm not saying that this applies to anybody, but in this could take us off into the weeds, into something else that could be another conversation altogether. The NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, and particularly the anti-war non-governmental organizations. There's a handful of them, and I won't mention who they are, and some of them aren't even based here in the United States, but they are what I call the anti-war crowd. Okay, if you
So,
huh?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No.
this is I apologize, but this is one thing that irritates me when they call themselves anti-war, so-called anti-war, or anti-war for Ukraine or Israel or South Korea, or in the
Right.
case of South Vietnam or the United States,
Right.
but pro-war for the other side.
They totally pro-war for the other side, because all you have to do is spend a couple of minutes on their website and go through a couple of layers, and you're going to see the baseline communist narratives. The baseline, they're socialist communist groups. They are funded into the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And these are people that have been around for decades. They're really, really well established. Okay. So if you are on the anti-war thing, bandwagon, you can get a piece of that pie, because they have a lot of money to spend. And there's levels of where that money goes. And it is just a tremendous, vast network of people who are involved. They have mediators that go around and interview people and talk to people and then present them, to their overlords. And here comes the money, right? It's not just this George Soros guy. I mean, there's people out there who are more influential or as influential as him and as wealthy as him. He's just one guy. And so yeah, I see that, because if you notice, there was all this, anti-war, we're anti-war, and they all jumped on that bandwagon immediately. Bannon, Kirk, and then it started coming out of the Trump camp, and whether or not he's got campaign donations from any of these people or not, we don't know. I'm just saying, all I'm saying is that it is an ecosystem. Okay, it's an ecosystem, and it has, and it's wealthy, and it has power, and it has influence, and they put money in people's pockets for we want you to push this narrative. And so that's what I see happening. Now, we don't know. We'd have to investigate that. Who's paying these people? Who's paying these media people? Who's paying, when did the war room get started? Who got it started? Where's the money train? And because it's pretty interesting, so it's an agenda. You call it an agenda, but unfortunately, and here's another thing I think too, is that I think there's accidents and there's inspirations, okay? And I think that it's possible, if not probable, that when Lara Logan and Steve Bannon and the rest of them started coming out and saying, well, Ukraine's just a corrupt government and Zelensky's just a money laundering puppet and whatnot, maybe they thought the war was going to be really insignificant and that it was going to last 5 or 10 minutes, and then it was going to be done and over with, and we could move on. And that did not happen. So and they did not calculate. We can say they probably did not calculate that there was going to that was going to happen. Number one. Number two, they were going to be up against people who are a lot more talented and smarter than they are. That they are not the only media on the playing field. You've got the media people in the European Union who are smarter and who do have more integrity. And so there's this backlash that started coming, right? And we were a part of that. And Conservatives for Ukraine were a part of that. We're like going, no, you guys are wrong. This is not what's happening over there. Russia is the bad guy. Y'all are wrong. And they got the message. They heard it. And they thought, well, we can't walk it back, and we can't say, well, I was wrong. I got it wrong. I was wrong. We got to figure out some other kind of angle that we can go at the American public with. And they just continued to lie. And the next thing you know, you see Tucker Carlson in Russia, okay? And now he's trying to hang on to an audience so much. He's so desperate now to hang on to an audience. He's saying, a clawed demon clawed me in my bed at night and scratched me all over the place. Show us the scars, dude. Show us the scars. I mean, the panic and the desperation of what they will say to the American public is embarrassing, and it's laughable. And so, you know what, Nevin, I don't listen to them anymore. I've just written them off because I don't have the time. If I see something they say on Twitter, it has zero credibility for me whatsoever. And so the issue is, well, I'm going to go on their show and I'm going to, talk to them about things because, they're good on China, but they're bad on Ukraine. To me, it is their job to know. And it is their job to be educated. I expect them to be educated, and I hold them to a higher duty to be educated. And if they are wrong, they should admit it. And so I don't want to have anything to do with them.
I don't blame you. And there were people who were brave who lost everything in the communist era, for example. So for example, you had one French journalist, Jean-Luc Couture, who admitted that he was wrong and lied to the world public about covering up for North Vietnam Stalinist communist regime. And he wrote an article where he basically confessed that he was wrong because he was totally repulsed by the atrocities in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos after 1975. You had people like various defectors who were high level in the Viet Cong who had privileged positions and a comfortable life, like the Vice Minister of Justice, I forget his name, Nahu Trong, I think his name was, and he defected and he wrote and he talked about his experience and how the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese lied to him about liberation. And you give these defectors, whatever their motivations, they come here at great risk to tell their story about exactly what happened. And they sometimes, they lose a lot. And some of them, like Jan Shaner, were not fully welcomed. He was a former Czechoslovakian general who told the CIA and other agencies of the American government things that they didn't want to hear, and really weird things happened. Like, for example, when General Shana, his house was quarters, which are supposed to be secret, a relocated high-level defector, put near the house of a Bulgarian diplomat in Washington, D.C. Really weird.
There's a lot of that. Okay. I mean, if you want to research people, when you go to research people, type in FARA, F-A-R-A, Foreign Agent Registration Act, and you can pull down those documents. They are public records.
Yes.
And you can see who's over here doing what. And it is a real eye opener.
And there's a lot of people that are unregistered foreign agents too as well. I mean, there's a few things I'm going to talk to you offline quickly after we're done with the show. You have, and that's what happened when you look at the historical precedent, for example, in the United States. GRU former GRU Colonel Stanislav Lunev had revealed in
Oh,
his book, Through the Eyes of the Enemy. He revealed that the
right.
Soviets provided through the KGB and GRU over $1 billion to $2 billion in cash through intermediaries and front groups to the American anti-war movement alone. And you're thinking in dollars from about the early 1960s all the way until the mid 1970s. That's insane. And that's why I always kind of scratch my head and people think, oh, the communist countries are really poor. Oh, they're really stupid and don't know how to manage economies and stuff like that. Okay, for their people, yes, they don't know how to manage economies and maximize human welfare. That's right. But when it comes to making money and pooping out tons of money, they have tons of it. They got more money than they know what to do with it. Um, so and what has happening is what I would what I would say is that they're using the same approach. They're pooping out tons of money and dispersing so much money to various personalities and groups in the United States and Europe in order to propose their line. And they're doing that through very complex intermediaries and front groups. You mentioned the
Right.
war groups and whatnot. They're probably not handing it directly. It's like the tenant media story to Tim Pool and others. They're not necessarily handing it out directly. They have to have a level of plausible denial. So they're
Right.
handing it through several people. It's kind of like the telephone game that we remember in grade school and whatnot.
Yes, that's exactly how I describe it. And the tail grows taller on down the line. It sure does.
Exactly. So, and let's take a look at, the dispersing of the money is very real, at least in Western Europe. To give you an example, and there are examples which have been documented for, in these connections here. When you take a look at, for example, the Rassemblement National, or RN, which used to be the Front National in France, they received a 9 million euro loan from the Moscow-based First Czech Russian bank in 2014. The French company Cotelec, which is chaired by Marine Le Pen, received a 2 million euro loan from Vernozio Holdings Limited, which is a Cypriot company managed by a former KGB officer and supplied with Russian funds.
Yeah.
You have in April 2016, the head of the Alternative for Deutschland youth organization, Markus Frohnmayer, met with Russian Duma MP and head of the Commission for International Affairs of the ruling United Russia Party, Robert Schlegel. You have 2018 representatives AFD traveled to Russia at least 12 times. In 2017, an AFD delegation's visit to Moscow was paid for by the Russians. In November 2014, AFD representatives met with Russian ambassador to Germany, Vladimir Grinin, who allegedly provided quote-unquote strategic advice. And there's also Stefan Moeller, an AFD member of the Landtag, which is a German provincial legislatures, I believe, in the province of Thuringia, stated that, quote, gas from the east is better than tanks being sent to the east, meaning to Ukraine and other NATO allies further east. And I can go on and read all these things. The Hungarian Jobbik Party, MEP, the member of European Parliament, Bela Kovacs, regularly met Russian diplomats covertly and paid monthly visits to Moscow. Venezuela and Iran, which are two Russian allies, allegedly funded the Spanish leftist party Podemos. And I can go on and on. This is all in my paper. And, some people don't like my style of writing because I just bury them with so much facts, but this is so controversial, these points, and they're not being talked enough about that I feel, for better or for worse, I feel the need to overwhelm the reader with all these facts and to get them to scratch their head and say, huh, I didn't know that. Maybe I need to kind of rethink this because, maybe, this whole narrative that's the F Ukraine narrative.
Yeah.
You know what? Russia really just doesn't want to reunite Russian speaking people in the eastern part of the country. Maybe Russia has a long term vision for
Right.
this, and I quote things that are even before Russia started to even invade Ukraine. I quote its long-term thing. One of the Jeff Nyquist brought up in one of his essays, a shocking conversation on November 19th between Boris Yeltsin, our supposed friend, to Bill Clinton, supposedly this wonderful Democrat who basically betrayed his base. In this conversation, Yeltsin says, I ask you one thing, just give Europe to Russia. The US
Oh,
is not in Europe. Europe should be the business of Europeans. Russia is half Europe and half Asian. And Bill Clinton said, so you want Asia too? President Yeltsin says, sure, sure, Bill. Eventually we will have to agree on all this. And mind you, another myth, of course, is when you have people like Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, even friend of the show. Well, I won't say a friend of the show because we disagree on Ukraine. He was a good interview subject, David Pine, who I like personally, and he's written some very good papers on different subjects, but they all talk about how Russia and China, because we back Ukraine, Russia and China are be driven closer. No, back in the 1990s under Bill Clinton, Boris Yeltsin was signing strategic partnerships with Russia, with China, excuse me, in 1996, for example. So I could give all these quotes till I'm blue in the face. You've heard that, by the way, that old canard, I call it a canard basically, that, oh, we're driving Russia and China together because we
right.
support Ukraine. Have you heard that one too?
Well, yeah, and everybody just, when it comes to these groups, the only group that they really know about is Burisma. Burisma. I mean, that's the one that's been on the front burner. People just don't realize all the activity that's going on out there. Okay, they understand that the United States has enemies, and how effective has it been in the narrative that's out there, in how bad the United States is and how corrupt the United States is and how our military industrial complex is evil. So meanwhile, it's just like bugs at night. You're asleep at night and you don't see what all the insects are doing in your house that come out at night. It's exactly that kind of thing. We are are ignorant to what our enemies are doing.
Yeah, we are absolutely. And look, I mean, my position on Burisma and Hunter Biden. Look, I don't think Americans, especially the children or literally the officials themselves on local, federal, and state levels, they should not take positions in any foreign companies. I mean, there needs to be much stricter laws against that.
Right.
I don't care if I like Ukraine or like Israel or dislike Russia and China and Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, whatever. No American, obviously current officials, former officials, or children of officials should ever take any positions in foreign companies or lobbying for foreign governments. I don't care who they are. That's a position I feel very strongly on. So nobody can call me a hypocrite in the audience in the pro-Russia crowd. I think taking a position in Burisma, that wouldn't exist if me and an imaginary party of mine, a radical civic nationalist party, would become the dominant party in Washington, D.C. And
Look at what it did to the narrative. It went from that to Ukraine is corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine is corrupt, and Zelensky is a part of it.
Yes.
The dots here, the dots that people are not able to connect is a problem with the dots that they are connecting from the information that they are pulling down, which comes from their nightly news anchor, and the Steve Bannon types just out there, you know, pounding it night and day. Okay, well, our audience, they hate Biden. And so we're going to give them more information to hate Biden with.
Yes.
And we've got the Hunter Biden and the laptop and bereavement and everything else. So we're going to turn our entire base against Ukraine's cause and against its president, who happens to be not only Jewish, but an attorney. And when you're over there on the ground, you ask people, what do you think about Zelensky? Well, you know, there are some things that we don't really like about on domestic issues or whatever. They don't really name it. They don't really say it. He won by a large margin of the vote. He was elected and by the people to serve the people. And in my view, that's what he does. I watch him a lot, and I think he's a great leader. I think he's a leader for the time that it is, and I think he's the leader that the people need. I never heard anybody complain about how he was managing the war. Those are details. Didn't hear anybody verbalize a detail about what they didn't like about what he was doing with, you know, domestic policies. It's a detail. There's always going to be that. You know, he is defending his country valiantly defending his country. So
yeah, and the funny thing is about Zelensky is he's more MAGA on certain points than even large portions of at least the last MAGA Trump administration. There was an interesting interview. You can find it on YouTube. I'm looking, again, it's in my paper on Ukraine. I cite it. It's called Reboot 2022, The Geopolitics of Industrial Policy, All Carrot, No Stick, dated November 4th, 2022. And it's interesting how this is, I guess it was hosted by Jeffrey Kane of the Lincoln Network. And Kane recalled at a panel discussion facilitated by the Foundation for American Innovation that Zelensky pleaded for the US and Europe to cease strategic trade with Russia. And Zelensky, according to Kane, said, clean up your supply chains and please build your own industry. And of course, I editorialize excellent, timely advice provided by a leader so reviled by stalwart elements within the MAGA Republican Party. This is ironic since Zelensky provided advice that would normally resonate with the free trade skeptical MAGA movement. In other words, Zelensky seemed to be more MAGA than the MAGA movement here in America.
Right.
Once, you know, and then of course, blah, blah, blah. Once we reindustrialize the US economy, then we would be in a better position to sell or provide through grants weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces to defend their homeland. So, you know, there's these little things, and it's just, it makes me so upset that, you know, here is somebody making a key point for MAGA. One of the biggest reasons why, out of a number of reasons why I supported publicly Trump in 2015 and 2016 for the presidency. And here, Zelensky is singing their song when it comes to industrial policy and economic nationalism and more of a greater degree of self-sufficiency. And here are these people. This should be resonating with people like Steve Bannon, who is a protectionist. I mean, it's like, what the hell?
But well, maybe it has resonated with the American people, okay? Because I mean, look at what the vote just did and what the American people just rejected with the vote that happened, voting Trump back into office. And we're now starting to see it from the top down, you know, this overwhelming vote rejecting this over here. The Ukrainian people, if anything, are brave, and they are devoted to their country, and they are devoted to their culture, and they're devoted to their children, and they are fighting for it. You know, that is inspiring. And that we need more of that as the American people. So when you think about these false narratives and these horrible, horrible things that the Ukrainers have been saying about Ukraine, well, you're stomping on the other side of that. Okay, well, would we take the knee to Putin? It's okay for them to take the knee to Putin. You expect them to take the knee to Putin. You expect them to do what we would never do. You've lost your fight. You've lost your fight for freedom. You've lost your level of empathy that you need to have for the rest of the world. As human beings, you are so disconnected that you would tell a sovereign nation, you need to fall to communism because that's better for me, because, oh, I don't want to look at the fight that you are engaged in. It was just incredible. And that was why I went over there. And I told these, I had a couple of lawyers ask me, why did you go to Ukraine? Why did you go to Ukraine? And I just kind of knee-jerk said to them, I want to see what it's like for a country to be defending itself from an overwhelming attack by the communist bloc. And that's what I called it, the communist bloc. And you should have seen the looks that I got from them. Boy, they looked at me with this anger and this hate in their face, and then they got up and they left the room because it was more than they could handle. Okay, this is the simple level that we are on. So we need to bring people into a level where they can read your content, that you should not have to simplify or anything. You write it the way you want to write it, and you give people the facts the way you want to give it to them. And if it's a fire hose, oh well, that's too bad. Okay, because they need to be reading it, and they need to be reading it. And so we got to take these people through we got to bring them up. We got to bring them up. We got to bring them up. One of my Ukrainers the other day, I was talking to her on the phone. She said, Lauren, when we say F Ukraine, it doesn't mean F those people. Okay. This is November 5th, 2024. That was a far cry from what she said on February 30th, 2022. A far cry. So the level of empathy for those people and the children of those people is something that I have tried to focus on. I can't talk about that and sabotage operations and Russian. You see what I mean about breaking it down into nuggets and kernels that people can actually digest? It's like studying anything. And then eventually we're going to get them there. And eventually we're going to help people improve their intellect. I have to read challenging documents myself. There are people that have a much stronger vocabulary than I have. Victor Rudd is one of them. Okay. Now I can read Victor's stuff all day and all night, and it sinks in and I get it, because it's just his vocabulary, his vernacular. But we have people out there who they can't absorb the content, Nevin. They just can't.
You're right.
And so pleading to them on a emotional level, I guess, is something that has worked for me.
And everybody has different skill sets and different styles and methods of delivering the information. And I think, and it's just, that's the nature of the beast. And everybody just has their own way of communication. Now, how successful has our efforts, your efforts, Trevor Loudon, J.R. Nyquist, the Conservatives for Ukraine, and this whole loose network, so to speak, how has it been effective in pushing the narrative more towards a position that's favorable towards continued Ukrainian independence, as well as a position that expresses more concern about Russia's long-term intentions? you're more politically connected, I suppose, perhaps than I am. What's going on in the ground? What do you find in social media? You just mentioned that your friend has now shifted a little bit of her rhetoric, like, you know, towards sympathy, towards more the Ukrainian
Yeah,
people. So what's going on? Is there
yeah,
a reason for hope, despair? And what do you predict for the incoming Trump administration?
yeah. Well, okay, so the war has gone on for quite a while now. Okay, it didn't go away like I think they thought it was going to happen, and it's still here. And people have to deal with it. They have to experience something on a personal level, Nevin, that will connect them to, okay, I get it now. Okay. And so those things have happened. We've seen massive amounts of corruption in the United States. Okay. So people are going, okay. So they're starting to get it a little bit, and they're starting to think about it. So I think once again, Zelensky is the right man for the time, because he's gifted and he's talented. He's a script writer, okay? He wasn't just an actor. He's a script writer who had to act in the role because there was nobody else that could do it, okay? So he's the right man for the job to sit down with Trump and go, look, this is what Putin is doing. This is what he wants. Here's the facts and the figures of all the tons and tons of agricultural products that have been destroyed, the coal mines they're trying to take over. He's laying it all out, the damage. Those people have been calculating the damage since Maidan, the human damage, the property damage, anything that is compensable for a restorative justice. And he is going to deliver that to a package and go, this is who this man is. This is what he is doing. Do you not get it? And this is what his plans are, like you said, like you have it written down. This is what they are going to do. Zelensky is going to be able to articulate that on a basic human level to Trump and to Elon Musk. I hope I'm answering your question. And
Yeah.
if they are able to, it's like teaching somebody to play guitar. You are the master of guitar. Now you've got to teach somebody how to play a C chord. Okay, you put your finger here, you put your finger here, you put your finger here, and bring, this is what you do. It is really basic 101 stuff. And Zelensky is really, really good at the 101 stuff. And this is how he has been able to get the support that he has from the Finns and the Poles and everybody else who are over there in Europe and who do get it. Okay, because it's all over where you go. There is physical evidence of World War II that exists all over Europe. So they live it and they know it and they understand it. We need to bring Trump and everybody else to that level of tangible understanding. Okay, so I think he's going to know how to talk to Trump, and so that's what I see happening. And I think that, okay, so like, isn't it interesting that Elon Musk was on a phone call with Trump and Zelensky? Why Elon? To me, I'm thinking, okay, they're thinking beyond the war into the rebuilding of what's going to happen. Did Elon offer Zelensky something? Because I know that Zelensky is always there to offer something to the other side. He's been offering his soldiers to all of Europe since the invasion. Their blood and treasure is all out there. Their grain, their exports, their intellect. Look at the weapons that they are developing. Oh my gosh, it's incredible. If anybody in the audience is I tell people, if you're not watching this war, you are missing out on just history being made. On the battlefield, it's incredible what's happening, And so these guys are some of our brightest and our smartest. And we just have to hope that Zelensky can break through the gray zone, the gray zone of what they don't know, and bring them into what they need to know. Otherwise, it's going to be to our detriment. It's like, the best thing that Kamala Harris did was when she looked at Trump and she goes, Putin is going to eat you for lunch. I mean, that's like the most honest thing I heard her say. You just see it go in his ear, and he had like a physical response to it. Thank God she said that, because it's so true. He will eat you for lunch. Are you going to let that happen? You better wise up. And if you think you can deal with this guy, believe me, this is a very skilled opponent. And so I have a little bit of hope when I hear Trump say Russia, or I hear him say China or something like this, and that little bit of sarcastic tone, it gives me a little bit of hope. He can learn. So let's hope that he comes over to our side and realizes all the things that we realize. And you know what, Nevin, there's a lot of people out there who are in much better positions than we are to reach the Republican base and give them this information.
Yeah.
So I feel optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to wait and see. I mean, Trump is very interesting, and we got to close up the show a little bit because I'm expecting company at 1 and it's just getting a phone call. I think we have to wait and see right now. Trump is an interesting case. He's been on historically. He's kind of like a ricocheting bullet on Russia and China since at least the 1980s. In an 1990 interview with Playboy magazine, he admitted that under Gorbachev, he, quote, wouldn't trust the Russians. He believed that the Soviet diplomatic and business representatives are, quote, much tougher and smarter than our representatives. He condemned Russia under Yeltsin as, quote, the world's nuclear Walmart. Trump wrote in Time to Get Tough, making America #1 again. Putin has big plans for Russia. He wants to edge out its neighbors so that Russia can dominate oil supplies to all Europe. Putin has also announced his grand vision, the creation of a Eurasian Union made up of former Soviet nations that can dominate the region. He also said that dealing with China along with Russia is going to continue to be our biggest challenge long term. When you look at the reality of his first administration, it was all over the place, and he appointed people from Wall Street and the Freedom Caucus, elements of the Republican Party that were hostile towards trade restrictions on China and Russia and whatnot. Even his son, Donald Trump Jr., when they were doing business with Russia, he even admitted the business environment was dangerous, and trustworthy business partners in Russia hard to find. As he summed up, this is Donald Trump Jr., Russia is a scary place. So why the contradictory positions? Now, Mr. Musk, look, I don't hate billionaires because they're billionaires. That's not my game. That's not my shtick. But I do dislike billionaires that are very hypocritical when they say, well, let's cut government and let's throw people off food stamps and all the rest of it who might be working, who might not be making enough money in the name of, quote, fiscal responsibility, but yet they love socialism when it serves their interests. Like in an interview with Automotive News, Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, this could be a future essay of mine, stated, China rocks, in my opinion. The energy in China is great. People there's a like a lot of smart, hardworking people, and they're not entitled, they're not complacent. Whereas I see in the United States increasingly much more complacency and entitlement, especially in places like the Bay Area and LA and New York. That's code speaks for I like China's authoritarian, communist controlled labor force versus those pesky American workers that want to be paid a living wage and have good work-life balance and all the rest of it. You see where I'm going, Lauren?
Yeah.
Tesla CEO Elon Musk has signed onto a letter which pledged his company's commitment to China's, quote, core socialist values. He described the American-Chinese trade relationship as that of conjoined twins and opposed efforts to decouple the U.S. from China. So I look at that and I'm like, I'm going to be blunt with you. I don't trust any of these people.
Right.
I studied this stuff. I've seen a little bit in Republican politics, a little bit in Palm Beach County, kind of that plutocratic attitudes, if you will. You know, before Trump came on the scene, most of them did not want to talk about the threat of China. It was all Muslims and we got to back Israel. Then once Trump came on the scene, everybody started to talk about, oh my God, China's a threat. So I look at this, and I know Musk he's been controversial on the Russia-Ukraine issues. It's been charged that he is more pro-Russia than people would like to possibly admit. So I don't trust these people. I think there's going to be a battle in the Trump administration, and you're not going to get a consistent policy. And I think the thing that nobody wants to talk about, because, oh, you're a socialist and you're siding with Bernie Sanders, but I'm going to have the balls to say this, okay? I got balls. You know what? Bernie Sanders, one of the bunch of things he's right about is the big money in speech and the lobbying issues.
Yeah.
And he's right. And if I were in the U.S. Senate, I would co-sponsor legislation with him to invalidate all these court decisions if it's legislatively allowed, from the McCutcheon and Citizens United, whatever the intentions of those court cases were originally, the Bellotti versus the First Bank of Boston and the Buckley versus Vallejo, reinstall the Tillman Act that used to exist on the book, and I would really ratchet down the influence these people have. I think people like Musk, who is a wonderful creator, SpaceX, Tesla, and all the rest of it, a vital part of our economy, should be treasured in that respect, but he should not have an oversized amount of influence in our political process and in the Republican Party. They deserve an equal seat at the table, just like organized labor, just like the teachers, the small business people, the retirees, and everybody else. Everybody is an important component in our national community, if you will, especially in the economy. But these folks have too much outsized influence, and they have overpowered people like Peter Navarro, who served in the Trump administration as a China hawk and a skeptic of these relations with the CCP. And he describes in his book, Mr. Navarro is a Trump loyalist to the hilt, how he was undermined every step of the way by these forces in incredible ways. And I just have to close on this point. We have to take a wait and see attitude. Like with Kamala Harris and Biden, I wish them well. In their administration, I don't wish them to fail if their policies make sense for a national security point of view. And I definitely wish Trump and his administration well.
Right.
I hope they succeed, but I will call, if they embark on policies that I don't believe is in the interests of our national security or favorable for the broad majority of American people, then I'm going to call him out on it. If it makes sense, then he deserves praise. And that's my stance, if you will. And those are my concerns. And, there are Jeff Nyquist and others have pointed out that Trump is also, tied in with very positive forces within the national security establishment in regards to possible appointments. I am comforted that there's the possibility that Senator Marco Rubio will be Secretary of State. He's one of the better Republicans on a lot of issues, actually, in the U.S. Senate. So that's, a positive force too as well. So we just have to wait and see. You can't be overly negative, but we have to look at the data as I've laid before you and just watch accordingly. Did you have anything else to add? And we're going to close up right now. Where can people find your works, your videos, Conservatives for Ukraine? Just give us a little wrap up there, please.
Well, I'll put when the video comes out on your YouTube channel, I'll put some links in the discussion below. Do you allow discussion people to post stuff on your YouTube channel? I can put some links in there, and then people can have a link to go to. So on YouTube, we are at the Centrist Post, and my personal blog links from that as well.
Excellent.
And I'm at laurencamelmorris.com.
Excellent. Well, this has been a great conversation interview. It's been very informative. I think the listeners will appreciate it. You know, God bless for doing the work you do. Definitely keep it up. I look forward to future conversations as the year ends and especially the new year starts in 2025. Thank you so much for joining us, Lauren. God bless America. God bless. Be safe and enjoy your weekend, everyone.
Thank you, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine. God bless America.